Morning. It is good to be back. I appreciate Tom filling in last week. Hope we got a lot learned about Esther. We actually had 2 requests come in when I kept asking, does anybody have anybody you want to talk about while we're looking at this subject? One of them, somebody said, oh, you're already doing that, great, and that was Rahab. And the other one was Esther, and that one actually came from Tom. And that's why I went to him and said, hey, I'm heading out of town. Am I loud? Tim? I'm sorry. I'm bad with names. If I forget 3 times, just laugh at me like I'm an idiot and remind me. And so when he said, hey, I did a lesson on that once, I thought, I've got an anniversary trip coming up, and that seems like a perfect time for us to get an introduction there. So we've been looking at women of the Bible, seeing what we can learn from them and their characters. And this morning we're going to get into Ruth. What do we know about the biblical character Ruth? She loved Naomi. And who was Naomi to her? Her mother-in-law. What else do we know about Ruth? She was not a Jew, not by blood. This is what I love about being in the Old Testament. You ask people questions sometimes, and they look at you like, what are we talking about again? Well, I get it, and it's just in the church. I know we got more of a focus on the New Testament, and I understand and I agree, but the Old Testament's there for our learning, and there's a lot of lessons we pick up in it. It's always interesting when you ask someone what they know about, and I like to pick characters because they're easy to talk about, to see what everyone's response comes back as. So, with regard to Ruth, she was a Moabitess, not a Jew, not by blood. She married an Israelite immigrant. She had unwavering faith in her mother-in-law. We're going to see early on she abandoned her people of birth for Naomi and Naomi's God. And we're going to look at a couple other things. There's 2 laws of the Jews that stand out that I think it would be good to go over before we get into the text of Ruth. The first is called Goel, or the law of the kinsman redeemer. Does anybody know what that is? All right, and that was the response I was expecting. So let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 25. And we're going to read verses 5 through 10. Deuteronomy 25, verses 5 through 10. If brothers dwell together and one of them dies and has no son, the widow of the dead man shall not be married to a stranger outside the family. Her husband's brother shall go in to her, take her as his wife, and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. It shall be that the firstborn son which she bears will succeed the name of his dead brother, that his name may not be blotted out of Israel. But if the man does not want to take his brother's wife, then let his brother's wife go up to the gate of the elders and say, my husband's brother refuses to raise up a name to his brother in Israel. He will not perform the duty of my husband's brother. Then the elders of the city shall call to him and speak to him, but if he stands firm and says, I do not want to take her, then his brother's wife shall come to him in the presence of the elders, remove a sandal from his foot, spit in his face, and answer and say, so shall it be done to the man who will not build up his brother's house. And his name shall be called in Israel the house of him who had his sandal removed. So God was big on protecting the seed line of Israel. He wanted them to stay as closely related to one another as they can so that outside influence would not come in, specifically with regard to religion. And he creates this law, which one, is going to protect the religion, right? Two, we're going to see it's going to protect the seed line of Christ. And three, it's going to protect the widow. We know property passed usually to male to male, right? This was another way of God reaching out and protecting people in the Old Testament. So that's one law we're going to look at that's going to be important for our study of Ruth. The next is the law of gleaning. This is in Leviticus 19 and 9 and 10, and God basically says, when you go through for the harvest, after you go through, do not come back through a second time and glean what you have missed. Instead, leave that for the poor and the destitute of the people, so that the poor, the fatherless, the widows, they can then come and glean among what's left. We look at this, we see, number one, God cares for the poor, right? Yeah, we can shake our heads this way. These two things are going to play an important role in Ruth. Does anybody know the history of the Moabites? Ruth was a Moabitess. Do we know how they came about? They were not from Isaac's other sons. This came about after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah with Lot. This is in, for those who want to know, Genesis 19 and verses 30 through 38. They're in the mountains. They think they're never going to leave the mountains. They're never going to see people again. And his daughters come together. They're childless, and they say, let's get our father drunk. We'll go, we'll lie with him, and then we will have children so that his name will not die out. The firstborn did this, and the child's name was Moab, and from him came the Moabites. You can see how the Jews weren't necessarily going to be close with them, right? How they're not going to be favorite friends. The setting of the book of Ruth is in the book of Judges. There is one common theme stated twice in the book of Judges that describes what's going on in the world. In those days, there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. So you've got this dark time, you've got this dark thing going on, and there is a man by the name of Elimelech. Elimelech was married to Naomi. They had two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. And if you are an expert in pronouncing biblical names and I mispronounce those, just humor me, okay? Because there was a famine in the land, and we know that happened more than once in Judges, right? We've read Judges, we've seen that. Elimelech sold the land. He moved over to the land of Moab where there was food. There his sons took wives, Ruth and Orpah. Shortly after moving there, Elimelech and his two sons die, leaving Naomi, Orpah, and Ruth as widows. And that is the context of Ruth. Now let's read in Ruth chapter 1. And we'll pick up verses 6 through 13. Tim, do you mind that? Ruth 6, 1 through 13? Yes, sir.
It says, then he arose with his daughter-in-laws, or that she arose with her daughter-in-laws, that she might return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had visited his people by giving them bread. Therefore she went from her place, where she was, and her two daughter-in-laws with her, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. And Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, go, return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant you that you may find rest each in the house of her husband. So she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, surely we will return with you to your people. But no, Naomi said, turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? still sons in my womb that may be your husband? Turn back, my daughters, go, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, if I should have a husband tonight, should he also bear sons? Would you wait for them till they are grown? Would you restrain yourselves from having husbands? No, my daughters, for it grieves me very much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord has gone against me. Then they lifted up their voices and wept again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her.
Okay.
She said, look, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people, to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. But Ruth said, entreat me not to leave, or turn back from following you. For wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people should be my people, and your God my God. That's 16, right?
Yeah, that's good. We can say 17. Go ahead, wrap it up. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts us. One of the things that draws you into this when you look at this is the selflessness of Naomi. How is this a selfless act on her part?
Without her daughter-in-law, she'll be by herself.
She will be by herself, completely alone. She's going back home because she heard a rumor that good things are starting to happen in Israel again. She hasn't seen it for herself. She's not 100% where she's going to be going. And she is sending her daughters-in-law away so that they will be cared for. She's giving up companionship. She's giving up security. You know, we're built for relationships. Does anybody, I know this is kind of a loaded question, does anybody really like being alone? I can tell you when the girls go to camp or exposure or whatever, and Sarah's gone with them, I sit there, that first day or two is great, right? I get to watch whatever I want. There's quiet in the house. By day 3 or 4, there's a problem. The problem is there's quiet in the house. She is willing to give up her daughters-in-law who loved her very much. Mario, go ahead.
Just to be clear on this, though, I have met people, mainly brothers, who think that solitude is good. And I've heard people say, well, people don't bother me, I won't bother them. But the Lord said it clearly in Genesis, it is not good for man to be alone. And so what you said is just huge, that we were made for relationships. Anybody thinking otherwise is just kidding themselves.
If I remember correctly, loneliness, solitude is the number one indicator of death above anything else, by the way. So, Naomi makes this selfless sacrifice. She tells her daughters-in-law to go away. Now, when you hear the word in-law, do you automatically get the warm fuzzies? Do you get the thoughts, or do you get all the jokes that people like to make about in-law relationships come into your brain? Under normal circumstances, I'm excluding myself from this one, okay? Under normal circumstances, when your spouse is alive, people do whatever it takes to avoid going to the in-laws, right? Everybody's pretty much kind of nodding along here. 1 or 2 people are shaking their head no. I'm glad you got that great relationship. The vast majority of people want to avoid their in-laws. It's just one of those things. But usually it's a mother-in-law. But here you have Ruth, who is now willing to commit her life, her faith, her heart, her religion, everything she has and is, she is willing to commit it to the mother of her late husband and mother-in-law. What could inspire such dedication in somebody?
She must have had an amazing mother-in-law.
She had an amazing mother-in-law, right? Respect and love.
And probably a good example. Very good example too, brother.
That thinks she was a good example and a good role model? Yes, ma'am.
I think it started with the mother-in-law. And his mother, how he brought that he left the church. That he was saying that he loved to talk to him and do that. And I never had no kind of crossword with my mother-in-law. I love her just as much as I did my mother.
So with somebody is, for lack of a better way of putting it, let's just say, I hate this expression, but I'll use it, with someone who is raised in the church, God is in their heart, and that's going to show, and people will see that and be drawn to it. Much more so than the pagans, right? Moabites, with the sacrifices they've made. I did a deep study on that once and what all they worshipped, and I'm telling you right now, my mind is at a complete and total blank. You know the expression, if you don't use something regularly, you lose it? I've got a lot of knowledge up there, and I'm going to hear one word, and it's going to trigger, and then I'm going to start spewing facts, but she was willing to give up her life to follow her mother-in-law. Does anybody know what the name Naomi means? Well, she changed her name. She wants to change her name to Mara. We'll see that in a second. Pleasant. Naomi means pleasant. Mara means bitter. And she's wanting her name to basically be changed, saying, y'all don't call me Naomi. I'm not going to be pleasant anymore. I'm going to be Mara. I'm going to be bitter. We could have a separate discussion on whether or not people grow bitter as they grow older. That's not really part of what we're looking at here in class. But if this is a reflection upon Naomi's heart, could that be an indication as to why Ruth might want to stick with her? She's seen the good, pure heart that Naomi had. She loves her. She knows Naomi loves her and wants what's best for her. And now maybe she sees some bitterness coming into her and thinks, I'm not going to leave her alone in this situation. We're just on thought questions here. There really isn't a thus saith the Lord where I can go point to that. You just see it in the naming there.
Going back to what you were saying, though, that's a very good plug to the Old Testament. Because they didn't have the Holy Spirit like we do. But yet, there's things that guided them. And I think that's just a beautiful illustration of the way nature's supposed to be, the way He created Adam and Eve. When you see a need like that, you gravitate to want to serve, to want to help. I happen to think that that's where her heart was at. She saw Naomi, knowing that this was a wonderful woman and she's going to deteriorate, go downhill. She wanted to stick with her. I think that's a really good attribute that God puts in there.
So I'm having flashbacks, memories, and I'm thinking about people who, when they encounter you for the first time as a Christian, you might be the first real Christian they've ever met in their lives. And they get to know you, and they get to spend some time around you. They pick up on your selfless nature. They pick up on the fact that you care about them. It can be contagious, right? You see it, and you've got such deep respect for this person that you say, this is a good person and I want to be like them and do like them. Just a thought. So as we're looking at this situation, she makes what's considered the most beautiful statement in the Bible in verses 16 and 17. Entreat me not to leave you or turn back from following after you, for wherever you go I will go, and wherever you lodge I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. The Lord do so to me and more, if anything but death parts us. Naomi sees the determination in Ruth, and she relents and says, okay, well, we're going back to Bethlehem. Yes, ma'am.
Ruth made a great sacrifice for Naomi because she was being very selfless. She could have never found another mate, never had any kids of her own, and she's been just as alone whenever she got older as Naomi was. And sometimes today, it really hurts me to see parents, some of them, especially the mother, they will cling to that child and have that child maybe as a caregiver from birth, and especially if the mother is alone. I've seen mothers cling to sons. The sons don't have any life of their own. They're, even if there's nothing really wrong with the mother, they're servant to mom. They don't have a social life at all. They don't have a spouse of their own. So when that mom dies, they're totally lost.
And it was a very selfless act on Ruth's part here, because she's giving up. She's like, I can go back to my mom's house. There's not really a famine in Moab. I can find another husband and move on. She did not want to do that. She wanted to commit herself to Naomi. So they return. Did you have something?
She also was committing herself to God.
Very important. Your God will be my God, your people my people.
So it's obvious that Ruth understands the God of Israel and is willingly following God.
And you see this multiple times in the Bible. The one that comes and stands out in my mind outside of this is Cornelius. Cornelius was such a good man with such a good heart that when he called to his close friends and acquaintances and said, there's a message coming and you need to hear it, they all came to hear. You see that similar situation here with Ruth as well. So they returned to Bethlehem. Remember that God has instituted the law of gleaning, meaning you go through the crops once, you don't go back through a second time and pick up everything that fell out and dropped. You leave some for the poor and the destitute. Given that they are coming from back, there is no one to care for them. This definitely qualifies Ruth and Naomi for destitute, right? So they come in, and that brings us to Ruth chapter 2 and verses 1 and 2. All right? Victor, do you mind reading those two?
Now Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him, in whose sight I shall find favor. And she said to her, go, my daughter.
Okay. Something else stands out about Ruth to me here. She's willing to work. There's a lot of people who are not willing to work, and it's not a male thing, it's not a female thing, it's just some people don't want to work. In the business I'm in, literally 1/3 of the salesmen in the store turn over every year. Some just don't fit in, but in general, what it is they don't want to put forth the effort. If you don't put forth the effort in sales, guess what you're going to sell? Nothing. Guess what happens when you sell nothing? You will not be employed very long. She knows something needs to be done. She's younger. She knows Naomi's state of mind at the moment, too. She's going out to take care of herself and Naomi to go get the gleanings and bring them in. All right. Mario, will you read verses 8 through 14 of chapter 2, please, sir? 8 through 14 of Ruth 2.
So Boaz said to Ruth, my daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with my servant girls. Watch the field where the men are harvesting, and follow along after the girls. I have told the men not to touch you, and whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jar your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you richly be rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord, she said. You have given me comfort and have spoken kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servant girls.
Okay.
At mealtime, Boaz said to her, come over here, have some bread and dip it into the wine vinegar. When she sat down with her harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted and had some left over.
Okay.
As she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men, even if she gathers among the sheaves, don't embarrass her. Rather pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her.
All right. So Boaz has taken notice of her. He sees her initially. We didn't read this just because I don't want to sit and read the whole book all through class. But he sees her. He says, who is this? Oh, this is Ruth, who followed Naomi back from the land of Moab. And he's heard of her dedication to her mother-in-law. And he looks after her, and his heart goes out to her. He has compassion for her in this situation. Quick side note. Who are the parents of Boaz? Yes. Salmon and Rahab. Do you think perhaps in this circumstance, where you're clearly wealthy, by the way, the Bible tells us that he was wealthy, but you also see that he is an older man and he is not married, and then he sees this foreign woman who comes in and follows after the God of Israel and dedicates herself to one of the Israelites, saying, I believe in you and your God, and they're going to be my God, and your people will be my people. Do you think there's something maybe in the way he was brought up where he looks at this in a way others might not? It's just, when you start looking at the family trees and things, certain thoughts click into your brain. So you have Boaz, the son of Rahab, who was a harlot of the people of Jericho, who married into the clan, became an Israelite, mothered him, raised him. You have Ruth, also an outsider, comes in, marries an Israelite, follows her mother-in-law home. I think there's something to be said for this when you stop and you look. Because sometimes we have a hard time understanding things from people who were raised differently, right? I was not raised in the church. I became a Christian when I was 22 years old. There were things that I struggled to understand that is just basic elementary to most of the kids in the youth group, right? Because they've heard it their whole life. I don't even remember what it was, but I remember early on when I was dating Sarah, maybe early in the marriage, that there was like one custom, I can't even think of what it is now to save my life. And I said, this just doesn't make any sense. And she said, oh, well, blah, 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 pretty much quickly like that. And then it just clicked in my head, but it never registered the way she said it. So here he is taking care of her. He's letting her get extra. He's letting her follow after him. He's given specific instructions for the young men to stay away from her. Leave her be. Leave her space. Let her get whatever she wants to get, and don't reproach her. All right, this brings us up to chapter 3. Casey, would you read chapter 3, verses 1 through 4?
Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, my daughter, shall I not see
whose maids you were? Behold, he win now barley at the threshing floor tonight. Wash yourself, therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your best clothes, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking.
Through 4.
It shall be when he lies down that you shall notice the place where he lies. And you shall go and uncover his feet and lie down. Then he will tell you what you shall do.
Okay, so Naomi hears this and she gets hopeful. She wants to take care of Ruth. By the way, do you notice here, and as you read throughout here and on into chapter 4, she's not saying my daughter-in-law, she's saying my daughter. She's saying he is a close kinsman of ours. He's not a close kinsman of mine, he's a close kinsman of ours. That this relationship is moved. She wants to do everything within her power to protect her. So here's the plan. Clearly, he's taken interest in you. Go and reveal your interest in him. Now, there's a lot of subtleties and innuendos into how this goes down and what this means during that time period. But what she's trying to do is take care of Ruth. She wants Ruth to be provided for. All right. One more scripture reading.
When we think about what you were trying to get us to think about how God works, even in the darnest predicaments, I'm reminded about how in our day and age, things may look very gloomy. Things may look very, very chaotic. But if we keep this in mind, think about it. We might be able to let the Lord use us to reach somebody that nobody would have ever thought of. I think about my life, had I not had a sister I used to work with introduce me for the first time to a Bible study, and I think about all the brothers that took me under their wing back to relationships. I wouldn't be who I am right now, and I wouldn't be where I'm at. And so it would be worthy for us, or it would be good for us to think about just trusting the Lord and not prejudging how terrible things are, so that one day we might be able to just like what was going on here. We know the rest of the story, but back then they didn't know what was going to happen, and it was all in God's providence. And we were talking about providence not long ago, but it's pretty neat when we go ahead and just let Him work with us, and we don't try to outthink Him. Make sense?
And I'm going to paraphrase for everyone at home. God makes all things work together for good for them that love him, who are the called according to his purpose. All right, let's read verses 8 through 13 of Ruth chapter 3. Now it happened at midnight that the man was startled and turned to himself, and there a woman lying at his feet. He said, "Who are you?" She answered, "I am Ruth, your maidservant. Take your maidservant under your wing, for you are a close relative." Then he said, "Blessed are you of the Lord, my daughter, for you have shown more kindness at the end than at the beginning, in that you did not go after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you request, for all the people of my town know that you are a virtuous woman. Now, it is true I'm a close relative. However, there is a relative closer than I. Stay this night, and in the morning it shall be that if he will perform the duty of a close relative for you, good, let him do it. But if he does not want to perform the duty for you, then I will perform the duty for you as the Lord lives. Lie down until morning." Boaz wants to take care of Ruth. He praises her. One, look, you're not just chasing after the young man, even though you're a young woman. You see that you're trying to follow after the law, that I am a close relative. This is true. Your heart is in the right place. and I know you're a good person, and I would like for this to happen, but all things must be done according to the law, right? We can shake our head yes. Okay? Why? Because God is going to protect the seed line of Christ. Ruth is going to be an ancestor of Christ, as we'll see before this is over here. We're going to do this the right way. I'm going to go to the close kinsman. If he refuses, we will immediately be joined, and I will take care of you. Now, he goes back, reports to Naomi what happens. She said, just sit here and relax. The matter will be resolved by the end of the day, one way or another, because this man ain't going to rest until it's done. We know what happens. He goes, speaks to the close kinsman, says, hey, you need to redeem the field of Elimelech, and you need to go in and you need to take Ruth for wife. The close kinsman says, man, it's going to bankrupt me if I do that. I can't do it. Takes off his sandal, hands it to him, says, here, you go do what you need to do. Everything follows according to the biblical pattern. Boaz marries Ruth, who fathers Obed, who then fathered Jesse, who fathered David. What life lessons, when we look at Ruth and we look at this circumstance, there's actually very few words spoken by her recorded in the Bible, which is fascinating. What life lessons can we take away from Ruth? It's neat the way God works. It's almost like God knows what is best and is going to make sure things happen the way they should, right? All right, I have a few thoughts here. Most of my thoughts from Ruth actually wind up revolving around God. One, we see a great example of God's redeeming love throughout this entire illustration. It's actually a lesson I gave here back when we were in the old building on that. We see that God cares for the poor. Actually, if you want to look at one of the reasons the Israelite wound up going into captivity was because they were not taking care of the poor. They were abusing the poor and stealing from them. We see God protects those who cannot protect themselves. Ruth placed her faith in the God of Naomi over the gods of the land she was raised in. We spoke about that at the start of the lesson. Why would somebody do that? It's hard to overcome religious teachings that you were given when you're a child if they're wrong, is it not? It's wrong. It's hard for many reasons. One of them means that mom and dad who taught it to you, you have to acknowledge that they might have been wrong about something. But she saw something in Naomi. She saw God in Naomi, and she followed after that. We also see faith is, always has been, and always will be God's way of redeeming man. It was not her physical lineage that mattered. It was her heart and her faith and belief in God. When I was doing this while I was on my anniversary trip, so I looked over and asked Sarah, I said, what lessons do you think we can learn from Ruth? And she said, well, one, Ruth listened to good advice. When Naomi, who knew the land and knew the customs, came to her and put forth the plan, she listened and she followed the advice of someone who was older and wiser. Also, just because you have a questionable background doesn't mean that others cannot see God in you. One thing everybody has is a past. All have sinned. All have fallen short of the glory of God. It is not our past that God is concerned with, but our present state of heart. And one final thought. Don't judge somebody based on their family tree. You got to get to know somebody But before you make that, I know a bunch of people who are as different from their parents as they could possibly be. Why? Because they looked and they saw mistakes and they departed from them. Yes, ma'am.
What came to my mind was Proverbs 3:5-6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not unto your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he'll direct your path.
Mhm.
Like what Ruth did.
So Proverbs 3:5-6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and he will guide your paths. Anything else on Ruth? Yes, sir.
Like the vision in first about her being willing to work. She didn't just sit there and wait for a handout from God. She put herself in positions to be noticed in the vision because she wasn't feeling sorry for herself. She was finding a living for her mother.
So her willingness to work. If we were to carry this over with a New Testament application, I would say let's go to Philippians chapter 4 and 6-8. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything through prayer and, what's that next word? Supplication. Let your requests be made known to God. You can't just pray about something and then not do anything and hope it comes to fruition. So, point being, pray about it, put it in God's hands, put yourself out there where things can happen. That would be like, and I use this example a lot when somebody's looking for a job, it's like praying for a job but never filling out an application. Any other thoughts, comments, or questions on Ruth? All right, I know we've got Hannah and Abigail coming up. I can't remember which order I have them in, but those two will be coming up soon. Again, if y'all have requests, anybody y'all want to look at, study, please let me know, and I'll see if I can fit it in. Thank you for your attention and comments.